prices. So it looks like it's kind of, turning in our favor here, at least over the last, 3 or 4 weeks here on the chart. So, we've improved somewhere, between 0.5% and 1% as far as interest rates in the last, 30 days. So it's been really good news for us.
Hello, everybody. Welcome to Mortgage Minute. So whether you're new to the show or you've been with us the whole time, you should know that this is not a show just about interest rates. Our focus is definitely on helping people like homebuyers understand the mortgage world as it pertains to buying a home. So therefore, we focus on data over drama and facts over feelings, if you will. Our goal is to provide education about the home buying process, both from a real estate and mortgage loan perspective, while providing you with the truth about these markets. So who are we to offer such advice? Well, my name is Matt Thomas. I'm going into my 15th year now in real estate. I'm a local realtor. My co-host is Brian Dewald, and he is a highly acclaimed local mortgage lender in his 20th year. And both of us serve the Denver metro and surrounding areas. So today we're going to go over a few real-time topics that are most poignant for home buying in today's market, so that you can make a decision for your family, and especially if you're considering buying a home in the near future. We have some pretty good news about what rates have done recently. But as we said, the show isn't just about rates. We are also going to be focusing on specifically how much money you can save and different ways to be able to use a mortgage to reduce some debt and potentially reduce your overall monthly outflow. So, Brian, let's first touch on, even though we said we're not just about rates, we do cover rates.
Sure.
There's been some pretty exciting news about rates in the month of June, and especially since we talked last. Yep. Brian, you want to take it from there?
Yeah. So, again, if you're new to this, you may not know but we tend to pick up the facts like you mentioned and not necessarily care about feelings. And if you've seen this before, you've heard me oftentimes be pretty critical of Federal Reserve and what they're doing, right? I like to pick on them because I don't think they've made very great decisions this year. Mm-hmm. But over the last little bit here, they seem to have changed their tune a little bit. So what I mean by that is, when we look at mortgage rates and mortgage prices mainly, a lot of that has to do with the Fed's actions to things, and what the data that they're looking at hasn't been necessarily aligned with facts. So, to kind of jump into it, I'm going to show you a chart here, and we're going to get into, and this can be a little confusing. So if anybody has any questions on it, feel free to reach out and we can do a chat on it there. But this is kind of showing us data from kind of mid-October, I suppose here. This goes back all the way to mid-August. But what we're looking at here, these red ticks are bad days in mortgage prices, and green ticks are good days. So when things start going downward, this is the value of a mortgage-backed security. In other words, the lower this chart is, the higher rates are. As we start to trend back upward here, that's an improvement in mortgage rates. So, kind of going back into October, this is the 26th, that was a big day. Anything that's green, especially the longer the graph is here, the more movement we had. So a big day here, a big day on November 1st, a big day on November 14th. And finally, what's happening here is that the Federal Reserve is looking at good data instead of bad data, in my opinion. So going back into a few of these different green blips here, the Fed decided not to raise interest rates, which was good news for us. PCI is a big component of, when we look at core inflation, CPI.
CPI, there we go.
Yeah. Is in there, and that was positively affected. There's just been a few really good unemployment. Finally, they're looking at, you've heard us talk about picking on employment, and unemployment data has just been wrong. So they finally got that right. And to that,
they came out with a correction, I think, didn't they? They came out with it sort of wrong, and then they made a correction.
Well, they do that often, but they're not looking at the data in whole. In other words, they say, there's 300,000 new jobs. That what they don't tell you is that 800,000 people lost their job and 1.2 million people took out a second job. So there's a correlation there. Sure, there's more jobs per se, but they're not necessarily good jobs that are reflective of market data. So anyway, that got corrected a little bit here, along with some other pieces. So it looks like it's kind of, turning in our favor here, at least over the last, 3 or 4 weeks here on the chart. So, we've improved somewhere, between 0.5% and 1% as far as interest rates in the last, 30 days. So it's been really good news for us.
That is tremendous news. And it's amazing to share a quick sort of local interest story. on a listing that I had recently. We had it had been under contract. We listed it in September. It took about a month to go under contract. It was off the market for about a month, and then unfortunately the buyer couldn't move forward with it, and so we had to put it back on the market. Thinking that 2 months had passed and we're in a really high rate environment, we thought, man, it's going to be tough to get showings. What ended up happening is there was some correlation with the drop in prices, in mortgage prices, and the rate in particular. And what we ended up seeing is a tremendous weekend of showings. We ended up with 9 showings over 2 days, and we ended up with 3 offers.
Wow.
And that was after basically 2 months since we had originally listed it. So we ended up with our 4th offer overall, and one that they gladly accepted. It was it was really just a win. But you really start to see how rate sensitive the market is, and it makes it when things are tight, when the interest rate is really high, it's really it just makes it so much tighter for folks. But the opposite is true when things go down the other direction. There's a lot of I've been hearing a lot about these numbers that are floating around, how there's talking about pent up demand, and specifically how many millions of people are sitting on the sidelines. We saw people come rushing back to the jumped off the fence and try to get in the game here as mortgage rates relaxed a little bit. And Brian, you recently worked with somebody who was able to take this. This almost sounded too good to be true, but I wanted to just have you lay it out for folks. You had somebody who took a very low interest rate on a home that was in the 300,000s, I think, and you'll show us this example. Was able to refinance, buy a different house, essentially not refinance, but bought a different house, paid off some debt, and was able to come out ahead in their monthly outflow.
Yeah. So when we talk about pent up demand, right? Like a lot of the reason is because people feel, and I totally get this, right? It's hard to make a decision to move out of a house where you've got a 3.25% rate to jump up into the 7s, right? So, but if we look at the totality of that, and this is just where, us as guidance and counselor type folks, right? We can really give them some good advice. So, I'll show you the scenario, but just in a nutshell, over the past year or so, consumer debt's gotten to be pretty crazy, right? From a credit card balance standpoint. And of course, with the Fed doing what they're doing, credit card interest rates are at an all-time high. So if we can look at the combined data, and I'll go ahead and jump in and show you this. What we did for these folks is look at, let me get the right chart here. So these guys bought a house back in 2019. They bought it for I'm going to go through this kind of fast. And again, if anybody wants to go through their scenario, reach out. But they bought it for $430,000 back in 2019. Right now, it's worth close to $582. They refinanced in the middle back in 21 down to 3.25%. But since then, they've gotten in some trouble just in terms of credit card debt. And again, this is super common. So they've got a couple of different credit cards totaling about $40,000 in a vehicle loan. Left over at about $56,000. So there's about $3,000 in minimum payments just between those 3 items. So what we look to do is, sell the current house, move up before the pent up demand, kicks into gear, right? So we can get potentially a better deal. So we used a bunch of that cash and paid these things off, and it kind of go through. Again, I'm going to go through this fast, but at the end of the day, even going from 3.25 to 7% on their new house, by paying those things off, it's a monthly savings of $219 overall. But more importantly, if we go through this blue box here, there's a $2,426 decrease in bad interest, meaning credit cards and auto loans and things like that. So if we look at the totality of that savings, it's a almost 20-year difference in paying those loans off, and a little over $100,000 in interest savings at the end by rolling it all into a house.
That's amazing.
That's super cool. That could potentially be a tax write-off, right? And I
like that last number that was down there. If you go down that to the bottom there,
the increase in net worth, right? That looks at a 5-year period of what your new house could be worth, and getting rid of that bad debt. So, some really kind of creative things that we can do to look at, again, the totality, not just going from 3.25 to 7% or whatever the numbers yield, but just looking at like I said, the totality of a situation. We could really make some nice headway here. And not to mention, we're in a cooler house at this point, right? These guys got into a really nice house at 750. So anyway, just going to share that.
And this is the whole point of why we do this. Again, we bring it up every week, but listen, we know that we're having to combat the headlines, right? So if you listen to headlines that says, now is a bad time to buy, there's the refinance game is completely gone.
Yep.
It makes no sense to do any of those things right now. The reality is somebody went from you said that they have a 3.25 interest rate, right? They refinanced, well, not refinanced, but when they bought a new house, they sold theirs and bought a new house. They ended up at 7.
Yep.
Right.
Yep.
Then
and stuff.
But and they obviously had some debt. They consolidated. They were able to come out $219 ahead and reduce their payments by 21 months. It's just insane.
Yeah.
Got rid of $119,000 potentially in interest. I mean, yeah, it's amazing when you do the math, and it's, what do they call that? It's a blended rate. Is that right, Brian?
Yeah, blended rate, exactly right. And to kind of add one more piece here, when I'm looking at those numbers, those are just based on minimum payments, right? When we're looking at a house payment, it's a fixed rate of principal and interest. Those credit card payments are nasty because they're close to $1,000 a month each or more of just interest, right? It's so hard to get ahead of the game.
Yeah,
with those. So anyway, neat way to kind of leverage the house and do all that stuff to not only wipe that stuff out, but to also get into a better house. So worked out nice.
No, that's awesome. Well, that's again, that's exactly why we try to illustrate these things right here on Mortgage Minute, and hope that there's somebody that can take advantage of this. Brian, obviously, we're going to leave your information in the description, and obviously reach out to me if you know me and I'm distributing this to you. If you know Brian, obviously reach out to him directly, but we'll get you connected with Brian and help you understand how to get that done if you're in that situation or something similar to that, right? That's just one example. That was a real example, but there are other scenarios out there that we can work through. No obligation. You just have to call and kind of, pick up the phone and ask some questions, see where that leaves you. We know that everyone's situation is unique, and we're here to help. So whether you're looking to buy or sell a home, or you're looking to see what mortgage rates are doing, see what creative financing might be out there to help your situation, that is what we're here for. So good stuff, Brian. Well, appreciate it. It's always nice to be able to report on good news.
That's right.
And especially here going into Thanksgiving, we hope everyone has a happy Thanksgiving.